Welcome to our unit on Internet Law. I'm really excited about this. My name's Nick Suzor from QUT, and I'm going to be taking you through, with some others, the law of the Internet in some ways, but really a unit about how societies govern online social spaces and networked technologies. So this is not going to be a survey of the ways in which laws that apply in traditional spaces apply in online networks. All laws can have some online application, or nearly all laws. We're not going to survey that. What we are going to focus on is 4 main themes about what is different about regulating the internet and what's important about regulating the internet. The first theme is the limits of law. So we look at the real effect that law has and can have on the way that the internet is governed and the way that people communicate online. And part of this means acknowledging the limits of law, looking at law as just one force of regulation in the online environment, and sometimes a fairly limited force due to the global nature, the massive amounts of content on the internet, the anonymity that it provides, and so on, the jurisdictional problems. The internet is hard to regulate, so laws are not always effective, and policymakers need to think differently about how to target and shape laws and legal regulation in a way that can have a real tangible impact on the way in which people communicate online. The second major theme is a related one. How does law regulate or place pressure on the intermediaries that provide the facilities or the networks or the software or the spaces for people to communicate online? This, to an extent, is one of the answers to how societies can govern the internet. It is difficult on the internet to govern individual behaviour, but societies can place obligations and responsibilities on the focal points. These are the intermediary websites, the large social networks or search engines, for example, that govern how we access information, or the internet service providers that provide consumers with a pathway to the internet. Because these are the focal points of control, they provide a way to leverage regulation, that states are increasingly learning how to place pressure on these bodies, and private entities are learning this too, how to place pressure on these bodies in order to get them to regulate the behaviour of end users. So one of the key themes of this unit will be to look at how that pressure is expressed in law and how it is dealt with by intermediaries. Third, we examine the laws that are specifically designed to regulate online behaviour. So these are laws that are sui generis laws or regimes that exist as a response to the problems that societies have experienced with the rise of the consumer internet over the last 20 to 30 years. These include things like spam legislation, privacy laws, the regulation of the domain name system, computer trespass and criminal computer crime provisions, and so on. These are specific regimes that exist to regulate online behaviour, and we'll study them in detail to understand how they affect both intermediaries and end users communicating online. And finally, the fourth theme that we're going to look at is how we can protect human rights online. Now, these human rights range from things like freedom of speech and communication to the freedom to be free from abuse and vilification. And that raises a really interesting tension and an ongoing tension that governments around the world still have not been able to negotiate. There is increasing pressure on governments and on private intermediaries, the operators of social networks, to govern online spaces in a way that is protective of human rights. Sometimes this means resisting government control, resisting surveillance, and resisting obligations to disclose the activities of individual users. Other times, it means limiting private power, limiting the power of search engines or social networks that have the ability to really shape how people communicate online. So there might be some cases in which civil society or private enterprise or governments will be seeking to limit the power of intermediaries to be able to control how people communicate. And we look at this to see how overall the constitutional values of physical space, of territorial society, values of due process, respect for fundamental human rights, how these can be protected in a networked world which is dominated by a fairly small and concentrated set of private telecommunications firms. So this unit necessarily links both legal practice and doctrine on the one hand, and policy and theory on the other. Anyone working in this space, whether you're working in legal practice or working for an NGO or advocacy position or working in government and for the regulatory body, this is a rapidly changing space. So anyone working in this field needs to be aware of both the law as it currently stands and the theory behind that, the limits to the law, both practically and theoretically, about how we should govern the internet. And that's a really contested and complex issue that we will spend a lot of time exploring in this unit. It's going to be a great unit. There's a lot of fun content, a lot of really interesting and complex issues, both legal and policy, that we get to explore in some detail. So I look forward to it, and I hope you enjoy the ride.